Hi, and welcome to the Everyday Person Podcast. We're your hosts, Mandy and Kyle.
Join us. Each episode will feature an everyday person sharing their story, the ups, the downs, and importantly, the laughs. We hope you leave inspired and entertained. Thanks for coming along.
Hi, and welcome back. Today, we're excited to sit down with Brian, who's going to share his journey with us. Welcome, Brian. Thanks for being on today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kyle. Thanks, Mandy. It's great to reconnect with you guys and super excited to join on this journey with you guys.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
Want to tell us about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think I've known you guys now, coming up on probably like 6-8 years. So Brian Masnick, been in Florida really my whole life, been in Tampa now almost 20 years. And yeah, really just excited to kind of, join this journey. My first podcast, so excited to, check this off the bucket list and, share some about, my journey as far as education, kind of growing up with a learning disability, managing that throughout my life. And then kind of carrying that through, my professional career and some of the ups and downs in that, and hopefully provide some insight to some people.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have a good chat then.
Yeah.
So just to reintroduce kind of the show to folks, we really think there's an opportunity to learn as you're kind of walking through these pieces already. That through everyone's journey, there's definitely ups, there's downs, there's laughs, there's sad moments, and everything. So we're excited to hear from your story, and really that's the podcast. So
For sure.
we hope everybody leaves kind of inspired, and maybe there's some entertainment factor throughout the chat.
I'm sure there will be.
Absolutely.
The greatest storyteller of all time.
Sure. The longest storyteller of all time, that some people say. But, we usually get to the point at some point.
We'll get there.
Yeah, in a roundabout way.
Well, we usually like to start and just ask, you get this message from us. So, hey, you want to talk?
Yeah.
And so how did that make you feel? What do you think?
It was really surprising. I wouldn't say really surprising. One, I think I was, flattered for the most part when you guys, sent out the message, and excited for you guys as far as, taking this next, step and really putting yourselves out there. So yeah, it was something that, once I received it, I was like, yeah, I wasn't even a second guess for the most part, like something that I definitely wanted to take you guys up on and really connect. And I think also at the same point in time, put myself out there too. Something that I learned from one of my leaders is that you never really get the chance to like grow unless you're uncomfortable and put yourself in uncomfortable situations. So I think for me, this is, slightly uncomfortable for the most part, but, something that I get a chance to learn from, and I think other people as well. So I was like excited for you guys kind of taking this step too, because it's probably a little bit uncomfortable for you guys as well. And, something that you have to like kind of learn. And I've always kind of been, I think, that type of person as well, to always kind of help out. And, if anybody reaches out, there really wasn't a hesitation for me to jump into it.
Cool. Yeah, no, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So this is your forum, Brian, and we, just want you to be able to open up wherever you see fit. So if you want to start, something childhood, schooling, so the floor is yours.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, I wouldn't say I've had, too much of a crazy or different, maybe, lifestyle or kind of growth. For me, I was the youngest of, 4 kids growing up, and where I think it was probably a little bit more interesting, as opposed to maybe like other families. We were kind of, I think, a little spaced out for the most part between myself and my siblings. My oldest sister is almost 12 years older than me. So it was a little bit of like a different dynamic as far as, that childhood, because, I had such older siblings and I was always the, kind of tag along for the most part. And myself and my brother were about 4 years apart. So it was just about enough where, I could get, along with his friends, but still bullied and try to carry my own weight. So it was always like pretty interesting. And I think, my parents have mentioned it before, like I was sometimes considered the easiest because, I kind of just did it myself and kind of learned along the way from my siblings. And I wouldn't say they're mistakes, but, where to, toe the line and where to cross it. But then I think also at the same point in time had, my siblings there to kind of more or less like raise me and point me in the right direction on certain things. So, that was certainly, I think, a fun part in my life, just kind of growing up and having, the gap in years between me and my siblings, and being able to kind of learn from that and kind of pick up the do's and the don'ts. And then for me, I think for me growing up and going through schooling, kind of a changing moment in my life was in third grade. I got diagnosed with ADHD. So I was the first one kind of in my family to get diagnosed, which was, kind of interesting because when you're, that age, you get diagnosed with, a learning disability. So, there's a process in it as far as, going to see clinical psychiatrists and, then going on medication and things like that. And I just remember, I wouldn't say it was traumatic, but it was one of those things where, as you're a young kid, you kind of get diagnosed with something, you have to take medication. And anytime you take medication, you're like, oh, there's something wrong with me.
Right.
So that's always kind of like what was in my mind, like, what's wrong with me? Like, how long do I have to take this? And I remember asking my mom, like, well, how long do I have to take it until like I'm cured? She's like, well, you'll always have it. And so I remember just like that moment, I was like, damn, I'm gonna have to deal with this like my whole life. Like, what's wrong with me compared to other kids? But it was funny. I think like the turning point in that, my teacher would see me like get up and just like walk around the class. And then I even remember myself, like I'd walk around the class, not know what I'm doing. And I'm like, I'm just going to go to the water fountain, I guess. So like she started picking up on that. Like, all right, Brian's just meandering around the room.
You're just thirsty.
Yeah. I mean,
thirsty.
apparently, I probably like threw for like 250 yards, got like 6 touchdowns, 6 goals in recess. So, I was working up a thirst, So that was kind of like, I feel like a turning point for me, like growing up. And it was like, all right, dealing with that. And then like more or less kind of like communicating that to like friends. Like, why do you always have to go to the clinic, in the afternoon? I'm like, well, I got to take medication. It's like, well, what's wrong with you? I'm like, oh, I guess I got ADHD. So it was pretty interesting. And then like going through life and kind of managing that, it's pretty normal now. I think, you probably know anybody that, takes,
Exactly.
Adderall
Yep.
or Ritalin or Concerta. So, but for me, it was, early 2000s. So it was like very new, I think, at that point in time. So it was interesting kind of, dealing when I was young, like, is there something wrong with me? And in fact, like now as an adult, like a lot of people suffer from it.
Right.
Some people just never got diagnosed. And
Yeah, it's like the stigma's not there anymore. And
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now, unfortunately, it's kind of like a recreational thing for some people, but
yeah.
Can we go back? Because I think there's a couple key points there. You're talking about growing up with siblings, and you talked about the age gap. We both have siblings, and maybe there's a big difference when you were in, growing up, different ages, high school, middle school. But now looking back on it, is there a message there that you would give to others as it relates to just your siblings and how you guys just navigated life together at that time? Anything you can reflect on?
Yeah, I think for me, especially with my siblings, it was like, we were a very active family for the most part. Whether it was myself, my brother, my sisters, we all had some sort of an activity going on, either through school or after school. So we were a pretty busy family, I think, for the most part. And it was great because, it kind of gave us opportunities for us to, always be around each other. I can't think of any times where, my parents wouldn't go to my sister's games or my brother's games or my games. And they always, really made a concerted effort to be there for us, for our games.
Great.
And then I think for kind of like that learning process and like learning values from my siblings, it's, how to, I think, kind of like interact with people outside of your age group. For me specifically, always being, the youngest, I wouldn't say there was like a vast maturity level, but, when I'm, 6, 8 years old and I'm hanging out with, high school girls, I'm considered, I wouldn't say like the little brother in it, but like I'm hanging out with, these older girls and like, they're like, oh, you're so cute. Like, so it's kind of funny where like you kind of, learn how to, really handle conversations at like a higher level. Like people still to this day sometimes say like, you got an old soul, but I think it's because, I've always had the opportunity to interact with people, much older than me. And so I would say like, that's probably at times what's caused me to like mature a little bit. I wouldn't say faster, but I'm still also very immature in some cases. But yeah, I would always say like that I think was a great learning experience for me to like really understand, I think at a young age, like how to act mature around like other people.
Okay. So you really focused on just how to adjust yourself to kind of not fit in, but how to relate. And so I can see that.
Yeah, more or less. And it's one of those things where it's, you don't necessarily want to be like a burden to other people, I think at the end of the day. So for me, it was just, always, just trying to think, be around people like, especially at that young age, you don't really, I would say, have like the filter or like the anxiety of, these people are so much older than me. Maybe they're like cooler than me. For me, it was just like enjoying it, I think, kind of in the moment. And especially I think at like that young age, that's something that kids should, I think, always should like relish and like really enjoy. Because like as you get older, you kind of get that, social anxiety or that social awkwardness.
Yeah.
And I could certainly remember that, as I would go through like my teenage years and then, hanging out with my siblings, I would just feel like so awkward then, as opposed to like when I was younger, I felt like kind of included.
Yeah.
But then like as you get older, you kind of get those, self-doubts. And, I think that's all about, growing up in puberty and all that stuff. So it was kind of interesting.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear your perspective. For us being the older siblings, it's like the opposite. So it's cool. I hope that our siblings felt the same way, like included and
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because being the youngest, you don't have that opportunity to like, be more or less the role model or kind of lead the group, so to say. So I wouldn't say that's something that like I miss or I wish I had the opportunity. I think in certain cases I've had that. But yeah, it's always interesting. I think the dynamics between being, an older sibling and then a younger sibling, just the life lessons I think you get out of it.
Yeah, definitely. You also started to talk about kind of the classroom setting. You talked about just maybe some situations that maybe you kind of realized. So just what about classrooms and changes and teacher interactions? Is anything there that you wanted to share and that you think others could learn from?
Yeah, I think, for me, specifically, like I kind of mentioned, being diagnosed with ADHD, and then, that was then kind of an opportunity for my other siblings to kind of go through that process as well. So I was, the first one to be diagnosed, and then my brother shortly thereafter. And my sister was just getting into college at the time. So, we all kind of, I wouldn't say fell in the same classification, but more or less, we all realized, okay, like we do have some of these similar traits as far as, learning disabilities and trying to keep focus for the most part. Because I think our biggest issue is just like keeping focus. It wasn't that we weren't getting the material. We all had, great grades for the most part. It was just the, attention aspect to it. So for me, it was, something that, kind of dealing with. And as I was growing up, this was when we lived in Fort Lauderdale. We'd been down there for several years. So my siblings had, all gone to the same schools. So we kind of had that, progression where it's, always a Masonic kind of coming through, the next school. So
Cool.
As I went from elementary to middle school was where it was kind of a shift. I wouldn't say in dynamics, but a change for the most part. The middle schools that all my siblings had gone to down in Fort Lauderdale had like a very different kind of, they called it block scheduling. So you had, I think it's like 9 classes, and you would have, the same core classes, but then it would switch up like every other day. So it was a very different kind of scheduling, and my brother struggled with it a little bit in his 8th grade year. So my mom was like, we're not going to go to Forest Glen. You're going to go to Coral Springs Middle. So it was an interesting process in that because, having to apply with the county to get special exemption to go to a different school. So I didn't get approved until like the first week through middle school. So I'd started at one middle school, Forest Glen, which I was, essentially zoned for, and then transferred over to another middle school after a week. So it was kind of interesting starting at one and then, restarting that and really going to, a completely new school where, I didn't have the classmates that I'd gone to school with in elementary. There was a couple kids that I knew from elementary school going into this new middle school, but for me, it was kind of like, fresh start. I'm still in the same city more or less, but you're meeting completely new people and, you don't have your friend group. So it's,
Right.
You're the new kid. Where are you coming from? Right down. I went to a different elementary school. That was it. So it was an interesting process kind of going through that, going to a new middle school. And then I went to a new middle school that was opening up the following year. So that was, my third middle school. And then in 2004 is when we moved up to Tampa. And then, started at a fourth middle school.
Wow.
Essentially. So it wasn't too tough, I think, because I had already kind of learned the process of, getting introduced to new people and things like that. But for me, especially, I think, with my, learning disability and then, a part of the side effects to, the medications that I would take was, I would say more or less like introverted. Like I'm very focused on just, learning, and I would just have like, I wouldn't say anxiety, but I wouldn't be as social as I would off medication as opposed to when I was on it. So it was kind of difficult for me, getting put into new schools and situations that I think make anybody uncomfortable,
Right.
Having to make new friends and adding that layer of, kind of a medication that makes you a little introverted was certainly, a different experience. And moving up to Tampa, kind of halfway through 8th grade, you're looking forward to high school and the girlfriends and things like that. And then having to reset and, you're in a new town. And it was like an interesting dynamic for me. I know you guys have, been in Tampa for, quite a while, but for me moving from Fort Lauderdale to Valrico, I was like, the hell's going on? Like they have a farm, agriculture. Like, where did my parents take us? So it was a little bit of a culture shock, I would think, for the most part. Just because it's not like we lived in downtown Fort Lauderdale or anything, but it was much more busier for the most part than Valrico. So that was quite, kind of the culture shock for me, kind of adjusting to that and then trying to get adjusted to it like before high school. And that's where, I think everything kind of, I wouldn't say levels out, but, you start getting involved in the sports and things like that. So for me, it was really, opportunities for me to like get out of my shell. But I could always, and looking back on it, I had the chance to, but I just, really couldn't take that leap, I think, more or less, just because of, I would say my insecurities that I think kind of happened from, the medication and other things. So,
Well, so I think it's probably relatable to a lot of folks, moving schools. I know personally, middle school for me was my change. I moved from Maryland to Florida. And so I had my approach, but curious what your approach was, just kind of making that adjustment as much as you could. What was your mindset kind of going in that others may kind of learn from?
yeah, I think what it gets down to, you just want to, kind of connect with people. There's always that like, awkwardness of, sitting down at the lunch table for the first time and like,
exactly.
getting to know people and it's, getting to know kids, around the neighborhood and things like that too. And, I think that was kind of, the catapult for me as well. Having moved from Fort Lauderdale to Tampa and the dynamic in that was, the schools that I went to, obviously I wasn't zoned for. So, it's not like I had friends within my neighborhood that I would go and hang out with. But then once we moved to Tampa, we lived in a large community where, a lot of the kids that obviously went to the school lived in the neighborhood and, riding the bus. So, having to get that interaction and kind of meet people and hang around them after school, playing out at the park and things like that. So for me, it was like always being, sports oriented and wanting to go out and play various types of sports. It was great for me to, have that gateway more or less to meet people. Because other than that, like I wouldn't say I would be a homebody, but I would probably be in the driveway just shooting hoops by myself. But having a large community of kids kind of at the disposal to like start building that network and those friendships, especially early, just before high school, I think is kind of key because I think that's where you get, a lot of your, I would say, social skills for the most part as you kind of move into high school and throughout college and things like that. So it's great learning experience for me to I wouldn't say put myself out there, but have the opportunity to, go up to the park and there'd be kids, playing hoops or football and then just starting that networking process from there.
Right. Absolutely. With 4 different middle schools in that short period of time during your formative years, like that's for me, like knowing you too, it's like, I wouldn't suspect, introvert by any means, but like, I feel like 4 schools, you're meeting so many people, you're just, putting yourself out there because you have to, and going to 4 different schools in that short period of time is just, that's a tough one to wrap your mind around, I think, because like you said, it's like you're establishing all these relationships during that time. So,
And then you talked about just kind of the lunch table and, that's commonly shared, right? Just join the lunch table. Would you give other people, maybe that can relate to your story? Would you tell them to just, maybe some aren't, they're not inclined to do sports, and would you encourage them also to maybe just kind of bite the bullet and go for it and sit at that lunch table, introduce yourself?
Yeah. I think that's, the biggest thing. And I look back at it and, I know I referenced it earlier, but, you get that opportunity from growth in those uncomfortable situations. And I think for, a lot of people, especially in adulthood now too, it's, getting involved in those uncomfortable situations where it's like, you're going to a mixer, you're going to, a party or, meeting up with a group of friends and you might only know, 2 people there. It's uncomfortable, but you kind of have to put yourself, more or less in that situation. And I think like a funny kind of story too, and kind of a coincidence in it that I just thought of, when I first moved, up here to Tampa, I remember sitting in the lunchroom and I'm like, that kid kind of looks like somebody that I went to elementary school with. And I was like, there's no way that's Mike Price. And my like English teacher, he like pulled me aside when we were coming back in from lunch. He's like, do you know Mike Price? I'm like, I just moved here. I don't know who Mike Price is. He's like, he said he went to elementary school with you. I'm like, oh, that's actually Mike Price. He's like, yeah, like he said he knows you. So like we ended up like connecting, and it was, I would say like a decent friend of mine, kind of growing up, but he had moved, I think, a year or 2 before and moved in a neighborhood, right down the street from me. So it was just kind of funny, like out of, all the cities in the world, all the people like, and I think that's like what's great about Tampa and kind of learning, like now I had that opportunity to kind of like feel a little bit more comfortable with somebody that I actually knew growing up. And then started like introducing me to like other people around the neighborhood that he's known for years. So it's kind of like, oh, I know Brian, like he's a solid guy. So it's like that kind of, validation more or less, or the letter of recommendation, I think, like in today's terms, as an adult. But yeah, it was kind of like that letter of recommendation, like, oh yeah, like, oh, Mike, you know him, he's cool. Like, cause I'd say like we were a little bit different. He was much more of like a skater guy. I was more like, the athlete,
the golfer.
Yeah. So it was getting to like meet his friends. And I think at the end of the day, like you always have like the cliques and pods, and I was always one to, kind of mingle across multiple, even though we didn't share like a lot of commonality outside of just, being dudes.
Yeah.
I think we're talking a lot about inclusion.
Yeah.
I think it's whether, someone came up to you and said, hey, do you know this person? They didn't have to do that, but they wanted to be inclusive. You shared how you're kind of, you cross different, friend groups. for me, just kind of relating back to your story about the sports and connecting in that way and new neighborhoods.
Yeah.
For me, that was actually my exact story. That my neighbor, when we first moved here, knocked on my door.
Yeah.
Just knocked on the door and said, "Hey, we're going to go play baseball in the street. You want to come play?"
Yeah.
And at that moment, probably didn't understood how I felt. But
Yeah.
it meant so much for me, or really to me, to be included. And then I remember just thinking through my head, okay, what am I going to wear? And do I have
Yeah.
my baseball mitt? And let me bring my baseball bat. And do they have balls? And I remember getting on my bike after that and just riding down, and then kind of the rest was history in that space. So really exciting.
Yeah. It's very much like the scene in Sandlot where, you know, he gets the opportunity and he's just like waiting outside and they like wave. He's like, okay, yeah, I can come play baseball. And it's like, okay, like don't mess it up. Like don't be a dork. Don't be a doofus. And so like you kind of go through that. Like you want that, you know, acceptance, especially, you know, as
that age.
At that age growing up, like you want to feel like included in that, like you're not, you know, an oddball or a doofus.
Sure.
You know?
Yep.
We could say the same about us. You're a 70s golfer. I'm a 100+ golfer. And you're still included.
Yeah, 70s and stuff. We're not getting there yet. We'll break 80 one of these days.
Yeah. You know, we also wanted to go back. I think a really probably a big part of your life has been kind of the learning disability that you've been sharing and this journey with medication. And so, again, when you think about just your progression and maybe somebody who's listening and also maybe going through something very similar, are there things there that you can share? Just maybe in the classroom, what were some of the signs that you saw, or just things that you picked up on that maybe that you think others would resonate with them to overcome or adapt from?
Yeah, I think like the biggest thing for me was, you know, understanding and kind of accepting like I have a learning disability and it's, you know, not, you know, handicapping me at any point. You know, I was, you know, still getting good grades, you know, making honor rolls and things like that. But I just knew that it would take, you know, a little extra time for me more or less to just, you know, digest the information and really understand it. For the most part. So for me, it was, you know, I was pretty regimented, you know, growing up, as far as, you know, just taking medication every morning and going to school and being very, you know, focused and attentive throughout it. And, you know, for me, it was, you know, always having that thought process that like, this is a disability and like, I hate it more or less. Like, I don't want to take medication every day because, you know, for me, it was like, I know I can function without it, but can I function at like a high level that I more or less need? So, you know, for me, you know, as you kind of go through and, you know, once you get to college, you know, obviously, you know, your schedule isn't regimented like it is in high school. You know, your classes are sporadic and things like that. And I think also part of the side effects too, that, I would say kind of like always was adverse for me. You know, it's the appetite, you know, as you're growing up, you expect to be, you know, eating as much as possible. And for me, it was, you know, I was always very, light, I would say for the most part. You know, I'd have, you know, a slice of pizza and a cookie at lunch in high school and then go play football or run track. So, you know, as I got older and would go and started going to college, you know, I'm like, I don't need to be taking, you know, medication and for one class, it's going to be, you know, an hour when I'm going to be, so I'm like, all right, I'm not going to take medication. So I started like weaning off it and choosing, you know, certain times and things like that. And I could tell like, as I progressed through college that, you know, the days that I wouldn't take it, I'd be, you know, less motivated or less focused, you know, going to class and not taking medication. I'm just sitting there, you know, looking at my iPad or something, or I don't think I had an iPad at that time. It was probably a Shuffle or something, you know? So, you know, looking at my iPod, you know, just, you know, doing dumb stuff, you know, searching stuff on my laptop, you know, not more or less paying attention to class. And I think that's where I sometimes look back at it and I'm like, I certainly should have had, you know, more attention to detail, I think, throughout that time, especially, you know, going through your professional career. And granted, I think, you know, there's just so much, you know, learning that you're getting throughout college, whether it's, you know, your core classes for your major or just, you know, the general classes that you have to take, like, you know, English and history and all that. So for me, it was, kind of, picking and choosing, when to take medication and, study and I would say not being as, focused or regimented for the most part. So I'd say sometimes that's like, something that I wish I could go back on. I'd put a little bit more emphasis and focus in that, but I think it's a tough time for any kid. You're in an uncomfortable situation. You're around 30,000 people, depending on, the university that you're going to. So, you're a drop in the bucket at the end of the day. And it's funny, like, you talk about going to school and you think about those times, like when you start college, it's like, you go to the orientation, you're around so many new people and they go over all these resources for you. You have the financial aid, you have, the career center, you have, different opportunities for you to like learn about different majors and things like that. And I would say I didn't spend a lot of time like really thinking about like my career and my future and like really what I wanted to do. I'm like, all right, I'm going to just go into business and, let's look at accounting. Took accounting and I'm like, accounting sucks. I'm never going to do accounting. Like if I make it through accounting, I'm fine. But if I can't make it through on the first time, dropping business major. Made it through, but it's one of those things like you got to try certain things to like really see like how you like it. And then like, if this is going to be, a career path that you really want to take, I think at the end of the day. And for me, it was, kind of going through the motions for the most part. Yeah, it sounds good. Like, it'll be a degree and be focused on business. And, I got a degree in economics and in sales now. So I would say my economic knowledge is, I wouldn't say minimal, but, I'm not going to be acing any economics classes, even though I've taken, a dozen so courses in it. So it's funny that like, you sometimes, kind of choose your career path at such an early age and, there's the resources there available for you. And, I wouldn't say if you don't take advantage of them, you're kind of, lost out at sea, but, you end up finding your way, I think, at the end of the day. So my always suggestion is just like, as you kind of go through this process, it's just like, see what works for you. Like if you want to study something specific and I know there's like assessments that you can do as far as like, what kind of fits like your personality or your style, what motivates you. And for me, I think always just like finding that motivation factor, like what you enjoy is the biggest thing, so.
So I really wanted to come back to the term that you use, a drop in a bucket. I love that. I think that's so cool because for me, I did everything online. Yeah. I didn't have the campus life. So with your background of, how you felt that, you were like an introverted person going into that and saying like, did you in that moment realize like, I'm a drop in the bucket, or are you looking back and you're like, I might have overthought it in that moment, like that I was like, I was going to college and all the pressure and eyes were on me. Whereas like now you can take a step back and be like, okay, I was just one amongst 30,000 people. So your advice to others would be like, just don't overthink it. Like, because you are just, you're just, you're one of 30,000 people.
Yeah,
and
absolutely. And that was always the thing for me. Like, I think I always had kind of a level of, I wouldn't say anxiety, but, anybody that would like meet me and get to know me at that time, I did have an outgoing personality once you got to meet me. But I would say I was kind of shelled off at some points in times. And, I think back to it, like walking into class and like, everybody's probably watching me like walk down and trying to find a seat. It's like,
this is me.
Nobody
is me.
Nobody
like,
is paying attention to me at the least bit, trying to find a seat or what I'm wearing or like, is my, underwear hanging out of my pants? Like all these things are like going on in my head. And it's just like, you're a person in the background in somebody else's life.
Yep.
And for me, that was like, I look back at it, I'm like, all right. And I think about it still to this day, like where it's, nobody's like really focusing on you. Like, and, I got to pull myself away from that thought process for the most part. But, to that point, you're really just a drop in the bucket at the end of the day. at, bigger schools like that. And it's, important, I think, for people to, kind of take advantage of everything and on all the opportunities that schools provide, because I think at the end of the day, it's only going to help you. There's never going to be really any activities or classes or resources that are going to be like adverse for you. Everything can be a learning experience. Like today, it's going to be a learning experience for me and hopefully some other people. So I think it's just one of those things where it's like, you can't feel uncomfortable to do these things.
Right.
Like
For
you
sure.
just have to, put yourself out there, and if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, you're like, all right, I know I'm not going to be an accountant. So I'm glad I got the baseline, but I will never do this again.
And going back to the example of picking a chair and the underwear, remembering too that everyone else is doing those same things, right?
Yeah.
Everyone else is joining that class for the first time. Everyone else is figuring out where to sit at lunch. Everyone else has to put on the clothes and wear clothes that that their parents gave them or they purchased themselves. And there's this saying that we all wear our pants the same way, and I think that's exactly it. And I think it ties perfectly back to the scenarios of inclusion. That just be that focused on inclusion rather than trying to single things and think that you're the outlier, because that's not the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think back to it, like even when we're young, and it's like you always had that feeling like, no, mom, just drop me off like back here. Like don't drop me off in front of the school, like where all my friends are. And it's like they got here the same way by their parents in the same, like it's not weird.
Yeah,
Like it's not weird to
Yep.
get dropped, but it's like you get like those, like I want to say, I don't know if it's social anxiety or just like those moments where you're just like, I'm not cool. Like how else are you gonna get somewhere? Like now you have like
Overthinking.
Uber and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yep.
But it's like, how else are you gonna get to school?
Exactly.
Teleportation in the future.
I know, something, or just ride your bike. I don't know, exercising.
So I think you started to go somewhere that's really important to talk about just how do you make that selection in a career.
Yeah.
Before we go there, though, thinking of parents and you started to talk a little bit about just your interactions in the classroom and all of these things. But I was curious, how did the interaction with your parents go over time as you started to take medication and recognize that a learning disability in the classrooms and maybe your shift from extrovert to introvert? Anything there that maybe could important for others to understand that this is how you could approach it with your family?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, like for my mom, I think specifically, she was always just very supportive in it. Same with my dad too. They're very supportive in it. They try to, assure me that like, you're not, a weirdo or a freak because you have ADHD. There are many other kids that, have it as well. And, it's just one of those things where as a parent, I'm sure they're like trying to just reinforce that there's nothing, wrong with you at all. Like you just have a different way of learning than somebody else. And I think it's like extremely difficult for them to try to communicate that to me and like have me receive and understand it. And today I'm like, yeah, I have ADHD and, I take medication and it's fine. But when you're that young age and you're just, a little bit different, everybody wants to be the same, I think, at that age. You don't want anything different from you. You want the same haircut as your friend. You want the same clothes, the same shoes, so you want to be, similar, and anything that I think makes you different, makes you uncomfortable, or makes you feel like an outlier. So for them, they always were, very focused in that and very supportive of me to, more seek the help, and then sometimes, kind of forcing me to it as well. So it was kind of interesting too, like as I was, going through college, and with my learning disability, a part of it is, like test anxiety, just kind of overthinking it. And I think a lot of people have that as well. So something that I was able to kind of take advantage of, because of my disabilities, was additional test time. So, if the class was an hour and you got, an hour to take your exam, they'd give me, an extra half hour essentially. So I would say in those kind of cases, it was beneficial for me to kind of, calm down throughout the, test taking process and kind of focus on it. But I think at the same point in time, it, you know, enabled me to, maybe not take it as seriously. I'm like, well, I'm going to have, an extra 30 minutes compared to other people. Like I maybe don't need to study as much. But obviously that was a poor way of thinking about it. Cause if you don't know the information, it's not just gonna, come out of thin air.
Those last 30 minutes.
So that was, kind of, a learning experience for me. It's like, all right, you still got to put in the work. Like, it's not just gonna, be easier for you, even if it's a multiple choice. All you're gonna just be doing is staring at that same question for 10 minutes longer. So, they were always like very supportive in me and trying to, provide me all the avenues more or less to be successful. And then for me, as I was kind of going through college and looking at career paths, it's, what do I want to do? My dad was in finance, in corporate finance, banking, my whole life. So it was kind of interesting. He had always done, very well for himself and for our family. He was, sole provider. My mom was, a stay-at-home mom. And, I think back and look back at it, still today and, for my family, having 4 kids, on, more or less one income, maybe you don't see that as much today. And so for me, it was, okay, well, dad made a career out of banking and finance. Maybe that's where I want to go. And that's where I was kind of, thinking about it early on with economics and finance. And I think I remember, kind of 2 points. My junior year, moving in with a buddy of mine that I knew from high school. We played football, ran track, but we were a grade apart, so we didn't really hang out really much. But ran into each other at a bar, and I'm like, I need a roommate. He needed a roommate, so that I think that was really kind of like the catapult for me to like really kind of come out of my shell more or less and really feel, comfortable, I think, going out, because I'd always had, I wouldn't say anxiety, but just like the self-doubt for the most part. And so that kind of taught me and living with him, he's, very outgoing. So it kind of brought me out of my shell. Like, okay, you don't have to feel weird in like certain situations. You could just go talk to people and like carry conversations and things like that. So I always appreciate that kind of moment in my life because I saw the shift from, somebody that was very reactive to then proactive as far as, searching out conversations or friendships or opportunities more or less. Because I think at that time it's, you could be reactive where somebody hits you up like, hey, you want to hang out? Or sometimes you're just kind of sitting there like you're waiting for the phone to ring,
Yep.
instead of, reaching out to people. So that was kind of a definitive point for me. And then as well, in college, I took a elective professional selling. And I was just like, actually like maybe sales is something, for me. It's, conversations, it's, business oriented, your relationship building. So, that was kind of a turning point for me in college to be like, all right, maybe like this is something that I want to pursue rather than, more monotonous, kind of finance and things like that. So, that's kind of then what led me into my professional career. And, coming out of college, it was, first interview I had, I got a job and I'm like, oh, this is easy.
1 for 1.
Yeah. But yeah, it was, the shift as well, kind of going from college to where, everything's more or less laid out to you to where, you have responsibilities. You have to learn obviously what the industry you're kind of stepping into, and be committed to it. And like, for me coming into it, I was like, I don't like this at all.
Yeah.
And like, you kind of have to like learn through that process of like the things you do like and don't like. And that was kind of the moment for me where I was like, maybe I should have spent a little bit more time in college, like really vetting out like some of the, potential career paths I wanted to take. So that was kind of a crash course for me, kind of stepping into that professional life.
Yeah. Was there something there more specific that you think that you would give advice to maybe somebody who's making the shift from high school, first year of college, they have to select a major? What looking back at that, kind of just building upon what you just shared, is there something that you would say specifically they could do?
Yeah, I think what it gets down to for me specifically, kind of going from, high school into college, I don't think I really knew the major I wanted until probably like my spring sophomore semester, where I'd taken 2 economics classes. I'm like, yeah, I can dig it. You know, it is what it is. Like it doesn't change much. And after I'd taken principles of financial accounting, I'm like, I will not be an accountant. This will not be this will not be the career path for me. So for me, it was kind of like I felt like I wouldn't say there was like a shot clock, but I'm like, all right, I probably have to make a decision because next year I'll be going into my junior year, or you know, you start taking your graduate level or core classes for the most part for your major. So you kind of have to, you know, I think have that decided as you're, you know, approaching that 60 course hour mark. So for me, I was like, all right, business, economics. I just remember like looking at some of the different majors at the USF College of Business and the pamphlets. I was like, I think economics sounds good to me. Like, why not? Like, we'll take other business courses. And, you know, I think for me in that scenario, I still didn't really quite know what I wanted to be growing up. So I was just like, we'll do it and we'll see where it takes us. And, you know, I wouldn't say it was a shot in the dark or anything. You know, I'd always kind of kicked around ideas of like, all right, what can I do with this? But for me, it was like, all right, just try learning as much as possible for the most part. And what I would encourage people, kind of moving into that, you know, high school to college is, you know, spend the time and like really look through like what you want. Like, what is it that truly interests you? Like, what are you, I'm not going to say passionate about because, you know, I'm passionate about football. And I remember in an interview, somebody asked me like, you know, what's your dream job? I'm like, oh, I'd love to be like a GM of a sports team. He's like, so why don't you go do that? I'm like, you said a dream job. like what am I supposed
We're
to
talking
just
about
say?
reality here.
I'm like, I'm interviewing for a intern store manager program, like for a tire company. Like, what do you want me to say? My dream job is to sell fucking tires? Like, no. So that was kind of like one of the things where I wouldn't say it resonates with me. Like, if you're interested in sports, like look what, you know, opportunities are in, you know, sports management or things like that. Like, yeah, you got to cut your teeth in any industry, but it's like, if you do something that you're passionate about and you're like, all right, I got to cut my teeth for a couple of years and like, you know, maybe really test this out. And then maybe you don't like it. You know, maybe it's not for you. Maybe, you know, you have a different interest or something like that. Like, it's just understanding like what's going to work for you and like what will like make you happy. I think at the end of the day is the biggest thing.
I think there's a piece there too, is that sometimes you don't know what's out there either.
Yeah.
So would you say that you actually spend time doing research on companies or looking at job boards or looking at certain you know, different sectors or something that help you start to hone in? Or
Yeah, for me too, you know, kind of coming out of that, and like I mentioned, you know, graduating college, you know, you're expected to get a job. And I remember talking to my sister and she's like, well, what do you want to do? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I want to try to probably get into sales or like, you know, maybe something in finance or something. I'm like, but really I would like a job at like $50,000. And this is, you know, 2012. She's like, I am a nurse and I've been a nurse for 6 years. And I just kind of like hit that salary point. I'm like, oh shit. Like, it's not easy. That's not kind of standard. I'm like, okay. So for me, it was, you know, I had gotten this interview with this company through a friend. So he had graduated a semester before, moved back to Tampa, started with this company, and he's like, yeah, it's cool. We play cornhole, you know, like sometimes like throughout the day. They give beer drops like on Fridays. So like we could drink beer at our desk starting at like 3. I'm like, ooh, this sounds cool as shit. Like sign me up. But it was like it was a logistics company. I just remember it was kind of like a fratty kind of a deal where it's just like there's 110 people in the office and like 105 of them were all guys, you know? So it was like a very like, you know, male egotistical kind of,
Bros.
you know, yeah, like boiler room kind of bullshit if you've ever watched the movie. So for me, it was like, all right, cool. Yeah, this is like kind of I think my jam. And then like, as I started working in it, I'm like, this actually kind of sucks. I'm like, everybody's like, they're not team players. Like everybody's kind of out for their own. Like, there's no structure. And like, for me, I think like what I'm like I wouldn't say regimented, but like, I'm like, all right, there has to be like rules, regulations, and like a professionalism. That's what I thought I was, as you graduate college, you're like, all right, I'm stepping into the professional world. Like you have to act professional and things like that. And like, I just remember seeing like, this has like zero kind of professionalism. Like some of these guys are just absolute idiots or just assholes. And I'm like, I don't think this is like really what I want to do. And I just, forced my way through it. And I'm like, I just don't know if I want this. So like, I remember it came time for like my, 6-8 month review. And I'm like, yeah, I just don't know. This is for me. And they're like, all right, we'll see you then. I was like, oh, okay.
Bye.
I was like, I didn't
Bye.
know that was going to be, I thought we were going to like have like an open discussion. I thought we were being open. I thought we were in a circle of trust.
Yep.
No. So that kind of gave me my opportunity then to like really search what I wanted and, kind of going through like various different job boards, things like that. And, it's, I think it's a stressful time, for us going through college. We went through college during the Great Recession. So it's like, you heard about like the horror stories of, people losing their homes and jobs and things like that. So for me, it was like, all right, like I got to find a job. And it's like, well, I don't want to just find a job to find a job. Like I want to find something that's going to be valuable for me. And that's what kind of led me into then, professional staffing, which was, interesting in its own. And, I think like early on for a lot of people getting into sales jobs, it's like you get these jobs and it's like, oh, you need to make 100, 200 calls a day. And for me, especially, with my, disability, it was like staying focused, I think. And, at that point in time, I'd kind of more or less cut cold turkey. So, I stopped going to the doctor and, getting refills on medication. So come 2013, where I'd been, taking medication from 1999, 2000 up to 2013, just stop. So it's kind of an interesting process in that to then, be regimented or, kind of medicated throughout school to then, in a professional world, kind of handling it without it. So it was interesting and that kind of learning process of like, how to manage your day and like kind of hit the KPIs that you're expected to do. And it was one of those things where I'm like, all right, like I need to like actually focus throughout the day. Like I need to do my job, make calls, set appointments, do all that jazz. So for me, it was just like, this is a lot harder than I was thinking. I'm like, I think like 100 calls in a day would be easy. I'm like, no, this actually sucks. I'm like, if you ask me to make 100 calls today as,
Nope.
a 33-year-old with 10 years experience, I'd be like, it's not for me. Like I will decline, like, I don't care if you give me $100,000. I'm like, I will probably not make 100 calls in a day. Like just not going to be for me.
Pursuit of Happiness. You didn't, Will Smith?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did not. Yeah, just
never
hold
put the phone down.
Yeah, I did not. Yeah, that was not me. I was like, put the phone down, click, click, click. And I'm like, it's been 10 minutes and I haven't done shit. Like I need to get back on task. And so it's like, it was always kind of that process where I'm like, all right, get focused, get focused, get focused. So I think that kind of helped me kind of learn to manage it, I think through, my professional experience and then like, just being more cognizant of it. Like, okay, like I do have to put a little bit more time as far as, staying on task and getting the things complete. Because I can get sidetracked pretty easily. Like I get sidetracked in conversations all the time and I'll be like, what was I talking about again? Okay. Yeah. Well, then we'll get back to it. So that was kind of a thing for me where I'm like, all right, maybe like this, dial for dollars life isn't really for me. And then, kind of learning through that, I had a chance to then relocate with a company down to, Fort Lauderdale for several months. And it was interesting because, I had the opportunity then my oldest sister still lived down there. So I had the opportunity and that's where working for that company and that opportunity was, that leader was the one that said like, what's gonna hold you back from moving forward? I'm like, well, I used to live in Fort Lauderdale. My oldest sister still lives here. I'm like, so for me, if I feel comfortable, I'll do it. He's like, well, I don't want you to feel comfortable if you're going to move down here. Like, I want you uncomfortable because that will give you an opportunity to grow. And I'm like, I love that. Like, yeah, sure. I'll move down. So it's kind of interesting then, starting that process, and, you almost feel empowered, as an employee. You're like, somebody wants me to like move down. You're going to pay me to move down. You're going to let me like work in the office and give me opportunity for growth. And, for me, it was kind of one of those things where I wouldn't say I didn't take full advantage of it, but at the same time, I was kind of, I wouldn't say one foot in, one foot out, but like I could have put more into it. And I don't think if at the end of the day, if I would have been like fully involved, because I still was like kind of having a life back in Tampa as well. So I was going back and forth a little bit. But for me, it was like, as I was like living down there, I'm like, you know what, maybe Fort Lauderdale just isn't for me anymore. I lived here growing up, always wanted to move back. And then after I moved back, I'm like, I just don't think this is like my lifestyle anymore. I think I'm kind of like comfortable in Tampa. I think Tampa's more what I want to be. And so I ended up leaving the company and then moving back to Tampa. But for that opportunity, I'm grateful for it because it did teach me a lot. I think that's always, kind of key in that, anytime I hear about somebody that, takes a job or an opportunity and it's like, well, yeah, I moved from, Chicago to Tampa. I didn't really know anybody. And, I just took the leap of faith. I'm like, good for you. Like anybody that, takes that job or that opportunity and it's like, I'm just going to move to a new city and
make yourself uncomfortable. Yeah.
And I feel like that's, probably the thing that I wouldn't say that I wish I would have done, because I obviously love my life here in Tampa and where I'm at. But I think if you always get those opportunities, like really look into it. I think at the end of the day, like if you have an opportunity to, experience something new, take the leap because you can always come back where you came from, is what somebody's always told me. Like you can always come back, like you can always move back. If you don't try it, you'll just never know.
Yep.
So actually, before we move on, if you could go back, I think you started to talk about both kind of leaps of faith. Maybe, where you're moving across the state, and then also just, you talked about your first job in logistics, and those are pretty big moments that probably could resonate with a lot of people to make a shift like that. So walk us through just, how did you come to those decisions? Was it just right then, okay, I'm going to go tell my boss this is not for me? Or is it something that led up? Did it take months, weeks? Just
Yeah. I mean, it was definitely kind of a lead up to that where, I'm going through it. I'm waking up every day and I'm like dreading going to the office. I'm like, I just don't like this industry. Like this isn't kind of because I've always had, I think, a very professional demeanor about myself, and not that it wasn't professional in any circumstance, but it just probably wasn't meeting my needs, or kind of my desires, I think, in a career. Because it is, it's a very fast paced industry. And you're dealing with, various types of people. Just I think it's for some people, it just wasn't for me. So that kind of led me to then, looking into other career paths. And, I knew some people that worked at this company and professional staffing in Tampa. So I was like, all right, like they seemed to like it, got their feedback, applied for a position in business development. And it was kind of a very interesting learning curve because I think any industry that you kind of get into, and, really any kind of role, like you really don't know. Like you can get a degree in, finance and, you get stuck in a finance team and you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing. So for me, it was, kind of going into professional staffing. And in that role, I'm like, calling on hiring managers. So finance managers, directors of ITs, SVPs of finance. And so I'm 22, 23 years old, doing the dial for dollars, trying to set, more or less appointments for account managers with these hiring managers. So for me, it was, kind of going back to that uncomfortableness. I'm like, I'm calling these guys, like these guys are, senior level, like hiring managers, finance managers, directors, and I'm a business development associate. Like I'm 22, 23 years old. I have no idea what I'm talking about. Like I have no idea what C# actually means or, programming or anything like that. Like, you have this org chart. I'm like, I didn't even know that was a part of an organization. Like, I didn't know there was like software development. So, I mean, I did, but, so it was like, trying to learn that and feel comfortable talking to these people. And I think kind of what helped me is what I mentioned earlier, always being like a younger person, around my siblings. So for me, it was like, I have to, call this hiring manager. I have really no business talking to him about like anything high level, but I'm just going to get to the point, set the appointment, and go from there. Like, I was overthinking it at some points. Like, what is this guy going to think of me? He doesn't care. Like, he's picking up the phone, like seeing a number. I'm asking to set a meeting on behalf of somebody else. Like, he doesn't really care at the end of the day. So once I got over kind of that thought process of, these people are so much more important than me, I'm like, no, I mean, sure, yeah, they're important to their organization, but like, they're not more important in any other aspect in life. They're still just a person. Like, it's important for me to set an appointment for them, like as part of my job, but like, they're not more important than me at the end of the day. They can get fired just as, I can get fired. So
isn't that such an important connection between, we talked about picking the lunch table
Yeah.
and recognizing that everybody's going through it, to now that we're all just doing a job. There's such a connection there. That's fantastic.
It's pretty correlated, I think, for the most part. And it's, feeling, I think, comfortable, in those scenarios and not overthinking it at the end of the day. Because, everybody's there to, more or less do a job. So just do your job at the best of your ability. And, I remind myself of that, I would say really daily. It's like, you have a job to do, just do the job and do it as good as you could do. Like, there's going to be days that like you have an okay day. Like, you're not, getting the stuff that you need done. It's like, all right, like I can get it done tomorrow. It's not going to, be catastrophic if this doesn't get done. Obviously there's certain tasks you need to. But at the end of the day, it's, you're not any less important than anybody else. Like, we're all kind of, numbers at the end of the day throughout businesses or organizations. So I think it's, finding, something that you really enjoy. And that's like what, has led me through multiple career paths. I'd say when you're coming out of college, you have that, expectation, like you need to start your career. You need to, cut your teeth for 2 or 3 years. You need to, have longevity at companies. You need to, stay put for, 3 to 5 years. And I think, for me throughout my professional career, I've had, ups and downs and changes and jobs and industries. But for me, it's like, I got to find what I enjoy and do, my best at it. I've had, jobs where I've excelled at and unfortunately, I've gotten laid off. And again, it's just, part of it. Many people go through that, and it's just dealing with those, instances and scenarios and, reflecting on it and, okay, how can I get better for the next job or opportunity? So, I've, had multiple careers. I, just started a new job a month ago.
Congrats.
Yeah.
Congrats.
So it's great, but it's, always kind of those things where you're just like starting at a new school. When you're starting at a new company, you're feeling uncomfortable. You have this, thought process of, I need to, excel at my job. I need to, stay off the radar as far as, layoffs or not doing your job essentially. And that's where, I've kind of, leveled myself where it's just like, what you're capable of, just do it and don't overthink it, at the end of the day. I think we're like some people that I've seen, the analysis paralysis, you just kind of get so caught up in these things. Like, what can I do to like really do my job well? And like, at the end of the day, you might not have really accomplished anything because you're just like overthinking it. So for me, it's just been, I've taken, leaps of faith before, switching industries. And then, like an interesting story and, progression in my life, during the COVID year, so 2020, had started a new job with a company and was working fully remote. So it was, before COVID, before everybody, had like the remote option, they were based in Vegas and I was working here in Tampa. So kind of had to jump on everybody else before that. And then COVID hit, and it's, that uncertainty, like, all right, well, what's going to happen with our company? We're good. We have, venture capitalist backing and things like that. So, I'm sitting there like, okay, I feel good. Like I'm doing my job, doing my thing. We're hiring more people. So that's a good sign. But an interesting development throughout that whole process was, I was looking for my next career opportunity after, getting laid off my previous job, and had gotten connected on this job with a recruiter that I knew. So I've been with the company, and come Labor Day in 2020, taking some PTO and had off. And I remember getting a text from my manager like, hey, we're going to have an all hands call. Like, you need to be on it. I'm like, well, it's my day off, but I'll jump on it. So it was the Tuesday after Labor Day. So our president gets on, she's, very flustered, and, I'm like, this is kind of weird. Like, this is a very ominous kind of all hands call. So she says, our CEO, resigned effective immediately on Friday or Saturday. We have some things going on internally. And we're trying to figure out, where we're standing at as a financial point with our company. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, this is getting a little sideways than what I was expecting. So the call keeps on like developing and developing. So, essentially, long story short, our CEO, the founder of the company, was actually, committing brazen fraud, falsifying our banking statements. So showing massive amounts of revenue when really we didn't have anything. But we were hiring a bunch of people. In our Series A was about like 126 million. And we burned through that, so it was kind of interesting. We had that call Tuesday, and everybody's like, what the hell's going on? Like, where are we at as a company? Like, what's going to happen? And then like, we start finding out bits and pieces that like, yeah, we have no money. We have actually been getting no money. Like, he's been falsifying everything, and he resigned effective
As
immediately.
if 2020 couldn't have gotten like any weirder.
Yeah,
like,
exactly. So
this.
like, I remember there was like a call that we had, and somebody had voiced like, well, where are we at? He's like, well, we have like a 2-year, burn period from our funding, from like where we're standing at financially. I'm like, so if we don't make another dollar, like, we're good for 2 years. I'm like, cool. Like, that makes me feel pretty safe and secure. But really we didn't, because he was lying on everything. So, effective immediately, like that Thursday or that Friday, we had another follow-up call, and they're like, all employees are terminated effective immediately, or laid off, I guess.
Wow.
So it was like that, the rug getting pulled out from under me for, the second time in, 10 months, essentially, where, the job I was at previously, excelling, hitting, every quota metric, and, just blasting out. But, at the end of the day, we're a number on the sheet of paper. So unfortunately, it was just a part of a group that got laid off. So for that, I was like, damn, again, like, I guess we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. And, going through, the applying process, and, during COVID, obviously many companies had to lay people off. Many people got furloughed. So it was like very much a time of uncertainty for a lot of people. So I was just trying to find something that like, I need to feel secure. Like, I need to feel like I kind of can control what I can control. And like, not have any other outliers, affect my livelihood and career.
Is that how you bounced back from so many layoffs? I mean, you've gone through what, 3?
Yeah, just 3-4 layoffs. And it's, again, sometimes it's just, on the luck of the draw, really.
Yeah.
You pull the short straw.
Circumstantial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In that case, it's, throughout my, interview process after that happened, I always kind of, love sharing that with, the hiring manager, because I'm like, it's a good beer story, because the company that I was working for at the time was like a fraud prevention company.
Oh my
And then, yeah, the CEO committed brazen fraud. So, it's a funny story to kind of share. And I always say it's like
Looking back.
Yeah, it's a good beer. I'm like, look it up if you want.
But you personally though, what's your mindset when you get that news, and we all have bills to pay. So
Yeah, it was certainly like a oh shit moment. I'm like, oh shit, like I just went from, making a good salary to now, nothing.
Right.
Effect because, nobody got severance, because there's no severance to pay, since the company was basically broke. So it's kind of like one of those things. It's like your last paycheck is like your last paycheck. So for me, it's like, all right, I guess I got to file for unemployment and go through that process. And, hearing kind of the nightmares that people are having during COVID from their layoffs and furlough and, systems, just crashing, just because of the massive amounts of people and applicants. So for me, it was just like, all right, like I need to, focus on, getting a job. But for me at the same point in time, it was like such a defeating moment because, I felt like I was at a good company. I was doing something that I kind of enjoyed for the most part. I was working remote. And then I'm like, all right, we'll figure it out. Like we figured it out before. We've, figured it out in other instances. I'm like, we just got to apply. So it's, searching the job boards and, looking at jobs and like getting offered jobs. And I'm just like, I just don't know if like this is a good fit for me and things like that. Kind of, I wouldn't say having the doubt, but what was kind of like the turning point for me in that was then like really looking at the companies and like understanding like, all right, how do you value employees? Like what's your, values in employee growth and what do you supply for us? What's your management style? Like, how do you guys operate? Have you had recent layoffs and things like that? Because especially like as you kind of go through your career and work, for me, I've worked with public companies and private companies, large and small. And, anybody can be laid off at any point in time. But I think at the end of the day, if you do a good job and you focus on building that network, just, as you would throughout school or in your social life, build a network with people. And I always, I've focused on that now more recently over the past few years of just, staying in touch with other, people throughout industries or contacts or old coworkers, because listen, everybody, if you have good relationships with somebody, pick up the phone, call them, chat, see what's going on, and, see if they're, working on something or if they're enjoying somewhere they're at, and just, have the opportunity to network, I think, at the end of the day. So
how do you stand out? Right.
Yeah.
Because so let's say it is, lots of people in the same industry all
During
getting laid off.
COVID.
Yeah.
And
How-
everybody's
how do
looking
you
for
stand out?
a
So that was
job.
like kind of the interesting thing too, because, all 200 plus employees at this company got laid off at the same time. So it was interesting because other companies within our sector and our competing companies were like reaching out to some of us, but then, they get flooded with, 100 applicants, for maybe 2 positions. They're like, well, we'll pick, the top 2. So it's, you really have to like hone in on like what you want to do and like communicating, your message, I think at the end of the day to the hiring manager. And, that's one of those things where like, just like anything that you start new like this, like it's going to get better over time. Mm-hmm. And like, even though, you interview multiple times and it's been, maybe only 10 months since your last interview, like once you do that first interview back, you're just like, what do I say about this company? Like, do I say that they committed brazen fraud and they just suck? Yeah, right. Like what's my highlights of talking about this company and like what I've done here? So for me, it was really like, identifying a job that I think I aligned to, and then kind of going from there. But for me at that time, having been kind of burned twice, my best friend that, I'd lived with in college, he had started a payroll workers' comp agency, and we had talked about it before, in early 2020 about me working with him. And I was like, I don't know. But then the opportunity like presented itself again, and, I'd never done payroll, workers' comp, anything like that. So I was just like, all right, he's my best friend. Like he's successful at it. So let's go ahead and take a leap. So yeah, like I turned down, multiple job offers from, other industries. And I was just like, you know what, I'm going to take a leap of faith in this. I'd always been, a W-2 worker. So I'm like, all right, 1099, eat what you kill, and, more or less, straight commission. So that was, really, I would say kind of the leap of faith for me outside of, moving to a new city. It's like, all right, you have zero income outside of, any deal you sell. So it was an uphill battle for the most part. It was a small company, and he provided me like a lot of insight and industry training. And it was really a lot of like on the fly, and as we kind of go, starting to learn and pick up. So it was a lot different from my experiences and working with larger companies where you have your learning and development team within the organization that teaches you about our company and our values and our industry and what we do. This was, kind of jump into it and start figuring it out more or less. Like, here's what we're going to talk about. Here's, who you want to target. So, for me, the runway is probably a little bit longer, especially getting into that new industry. And thoroughly enjoyed it. And, I appreciate the opportunity that, was provided for me. And like, as I was kind of working through that, I'm like, all right, I don't have a boss, more or less. Like, he owned the company. I worked with him, worked for him. But at the end of the day, like, if I didn't want to make a call on Friday, like, I didn't have to make a call. Like, if somebody called me, yeah, I got to pick up the phone, because, I'm responsible for their business, more or less. But if I didn't want to do shit, I didn't have to do shit. Like, so it kind of gave you that autonomy to like kind of, put forth as much effort as you want to get whatever you want out of it. So as I was kind of going through that progression and learning more about the industry and the processes and things like that, and really for me, like owning that, entrepreneurial kind of, spirit at the end of the day, I was like, I'm starting to like feel like I do miss that, corporate environment, corporate structure. And, with him being my best friend, we just had, an open discussion, and I was like, I think I'm gonna like move back into that corporate structure. And, I started with another company, after working with him for a little over a year and a half, and started with this company, an e-commerce company, doing partnerships, and, was enjoying it, making it through. I started with them back in March of 2021. But just like, many companies, they were having issues as far as just, revenues and things, especially with just the economy. So was a part of a global layoff at the beginning of the year. So it's one of those things where it's like, shit, I thought I left it to do like, my own thing, have the minus outliers, and I knew the risk getting back into it. They're a public company. At the end of the day, again, everybody's just a number on a sheet. It doesn't matter who you are. You can be disposable. So was unfortunately a part, of a layoff with them. And, it was one of those things where it was just like, all right, we figured it out before, we'll figure it out again. It's ups and downs. And I think at the end of the day, it's just, focusing on like what you can control. There's going to be
from that lens though, but so for somebody who has joined several companies and started fresh, it almost relates back to what we've talked about from, shifting schools, moving across the state.
Yeah.
But, so when you think about it from the professional space, just what advice would you give folks just so that they could start out good in that company, start out with a, best foot forward, despite the layoffs, despite challenges, but just what's helped you?
Yeah, I think, for me and like what I've really honed, in starting this new position, over the past month or so, it's just, focusing on the things that I can control and like trying to, understand as much as I can about, the role, the company, what I'm going to be doing. And I think the biggest thing too, it's like, joining an organization that, has, I would say kind of like the learning and development to like really kind of teach you and allow you that opportunity to grow. I think where I've seen and now kind of understand and kind of identifying that through, companies that I've interviewed with or worked for, it's like, you step into a role, they're like, okay, like here's your laptop, go ahead. And it's like, do I get like no direction or are you just kind of, pushing me out there? And And I think that's the biggest thing for me too, and like what I've really searched for in leaders. Which leaders are bosses, which ones are leaders, and which ones are kind of bosses. I think at the end of the day, and there's such a fine line between that. And I've had some great bosses, and I've had some shitty ones. And what makes bosses great in my case, and for me, it's somebody that's going to be spending the time to kind of work with you and make sure that you're grasping it for the most part, and not just throwing you into the deep end or expecting you to come to the table with information or not knowing what's going on with you and your job.
So you've taken us all over.
Yeah.
Shared a lot of good things I think are going to resonate with a lot of people. What do you think in closing remarks, things that you want to leave people to know about you, about your journey?
I think, I think at the end of the day, like what I've kind of learned the most that my fiance told me was, rejection is redirection. And I don't know if it sounds corny or just, faux pas, but, or maybe hard for people to grasp. But I've had rejection in my professional life, my personal life, in relationships. And in those moments, you always kind of look at it like this is the absolute worst thing possible. How am I going to, rebound from this? And you're in that lull, you just feel like everything is against you. But at the end of the day, like it's tough. Yeah. I think everybody goes through that. And it's easier said than done to, it'll work itself out. And in those moments, that's typically not what, I think people want to hear. It's, understanding, I think where to lend empathy and like advice and things like that. But, what I just want to like leave with people, it's like, there's going to be ups and downs, I think, in any life. And I would say recently for me, like over the past few years, like I've certainly had some downs, some pretty significant downs than probably I think a lot of people have experienced. But I think there's also still a lot of people that have had probably worse downs than me. So, putting that in perspective, it's like, yeah, I might, have lost a relationship or lost a job or, lose a sale or an opportunity. I'm like, it's not gonna like, that's what's, my fiance said to me too, like, nobody's gonna like go to your funeral and be like, oh yeah, Brian worked at that company for like 15 years. Like that was cool. Like he worked at one company for his whole life. Like nobody gives a shit about that. Nobody's gonna be like, well, yeah, Brian worked, at 15 different companies. Like nobody's gonna think about that. Nobody's gonna talk about that. Nobody really cares. It's about, the person that you are, the learning experiences that you have, and looking at those instances in life as opportunities for growth. I think at the end of the day, like this is an opportunity for me to grow, learning how to, share my experiences with people is, hopeful learnings for them. And at the end of the day, like, it is what it is. Like, this can be successful. This can be, maybe not as successful, but at the end of the day, like it's something to do, it's something to learn from. And that's all you got to take each and every experience from.
Yeah. No, good message.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah. And I was just going to add that I think that you really spoke to our mission on the Everyday Person podcast with just emphasizing when you were about that no one is better than anybody else.
Yeah.
You might be higher up in the company, but our mission is really to bring the everyday person to light. And you really drove that home, I think, for everyone, just in that statement. And then just pushing yourself to make yourself uncomfortable and to really recognize that everybody has that social anxiety and overthinking things, and kind of putting that into perspective, basically knowing that you're not alone. So, I really appreciate all your thoughts and everything that you brought to the table today. So thank you for being on with us today, Brian.
Yeah. Thank you. See ya.